"Excuse me, defendants wait over there," the bailiff said, blocking her path. The courtroom froze. The elegant black woman in a tailored navy suit didn't move. She wasn't the defendant. She wasn't the secretary. She was the lead attorney, and soon, everyone in that room would know it. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta loomed like a monument of power, its marble columns gleaming in the morning sun. Inside, the air was thick with the quiet buzz of attorneys, clerks, and clients moving from bench to bench. When attorney Maya Collins stepped through the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 3B, conversations faltered. She wore a tailored navy suit, heels clicking confidently against the polished floor, a slim leather case in her hand. But to the room, her presence seemed misplaced. The bailiff's brows furrowed. "Ma'am, defendants wait over there," he said, pointing toward the benches in the back. His voice carried across the chamber, drawing a ripple of attention. Maya stopped, her eyes steady. "I'm not the defendant," she said quietly, but firmly. From the jury box, a clerk whispered to another, both stifling smiles. Near the front, opposing counsel, a middle-aged man with silver hair, chuckled audibly. "New secretary, maybe?" he muttered, not bothering to hide his disdain. Even Judge Whitman, seated high on the bench, peered down over his glasses. "Young lady, are you certain you're in the right courtroom?" Attorneys check in with the clerk. His tone was half question, half dismissal, as though he'd seen this mistake before. Maya lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Yes, Your Honor. I know exactly where I am." The courtroom fell into a tense hush. To most, she was still invisible, a trespasser in a place reserved for men in gray suits and polished shoes. But what none of them knew was that the case they were about to hear rested squarely in her hands. And Maya Collins was no one's secretary. The gavel cracked against the bench, and the session began. Papers shuffled, laptops clicked open, and the rustle of authority filled the air. But when attorney Maya Collins rose to introduce herself, the undermining began in earnest. "State your name for the record," Judge Whitman said, adjusting his glasses. "And please clarify your role here, Ms. Collins." "Attorney Maya Collins," she replied evenly. "Lead counsel for the plaintiff." The judge's brow twitched, his pen pausing mid-note. "Lead counsel," he repeated, as though testing the words on his tongue. From the defense table, Richard Callahan, the seasoned lawyer opposite her, smirked. He leaned back in his chair, whispering loudly enough for the gallery to hear. Must be her first real case. Brave of them to send her in. His co-counsel chuckled, not even pretending to hide it. Maya opened her file, ignoring the sting. She had prepared for this, not just the legal arguments, but the prejudice that always seemed to follow her into rooms like this one. When she began to question her first witness, Callahan interrupted almost immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is leading the witness." Whitman nodded quickly. "Sustained. Ms. Collins, please stick to proper questioning format." She adjusted, recalibrated, asked again. Callahan objected again. Sustained. It became a rhythm. Every time Maya pressed forward, Callahan cut in, his objections less about law and more about performance. Each time, the judge indulged him, leaning toward the defense table with a familiarity that stung like salt. The murmurs in the gallery grew. A woman in pearls whispered to her husband, "She's not ready for this." A young intern scribbled notes, eyes darting to Maya with pity disguised as curiosity. Maya stood tall, her voice steady despite the storm. She knew what they saw, a young black woman daring to occupy a space they thought wasn't hers. What they didn't see, yet, was the arsenal of preparation she carried inside her. The case was just beginning, and though they tried to bury her under doubt, Maya Collins was digging her own foundation, brick by brick, to turn this courtroom into her stage. By the second hour, the courtroom had become a theater of dismissals. Every sentence Maya spoke seemed to invite interruption. Every objection from Callahan carried a smirk, every ruling from Judge Whitman an undertone of condescension. When Maya presented an exhibit, Callahan scoffed. "Your Honor, perhaps junior counsel should let senior attorneys handle the technicals." The courtroom chuckled. Even the bailiff's lips twitched. Maya inhaled slowly, her composure a shield. She placed the exhibit neatly on the table, then turned, not to Callahan, not to the judge, but to the jury. Her voice was calm, measured, resonant. "Ladies and gentlemen, the defense would like you to believe that this case is about inexperience. That I don't belong here. That I should stand quietly while others speak. But let's look at the facts." She clicked her remote, and the evidence appeared on the screen behind her. Clear, irrefutable financial records that cut directly to the heart of the case. The jury leaned forward. Even Judge Whitman's pen stilled. Callahan rose to object, but Maya lifted a hand, her tone slicing through his performance. "Before you interrupt me again, Mr. Callahan, perhaps you should know." She reached into her briefcase and produced a leather portfolio, placing it on the counsel's table with deliberate care. "I am not junior counsel. I am the managing partner of Collins & Green, the firm your client's company retained to represent them last year in a multi-million-dollar merger. A firm I now lead." Gasps rippled through the room. The gallery erupted in whispers. Callahan's smirk collapsed into stunned silence. Judge Whitman blinked, his jaw tight. "You're the managing partner?" Maya's gaze was steady, unshaken. "Yes, Your Honor. And I am here today, as lead counsel for the plaintiff, fully prepared to finish this case." The weight of her revelation crashed over the courtroom. Every earlier slight, every dismissive comment, every assumption now hung in the air like evidence of their own prejudice. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence was her victory. And the tide had turned. The silence in the courtroom was thick enough to cut. For the first time that morning, Richard Callahan had no smirk, no quip, no objection perched on his lips. He simply sat, pen frozen in his hand, eyes darting between Maya and the jury as if trying to rewrite the narrative in real time. But it was too late. Maya Collins stood taller, every inch the attorney she had always been, but whom they had refused to see. Her voice was steady, clear, resonant with the authority of someone who not only belonged, but commanded. "Your Honor," she said, sliding the final exhibit across the table. "This evidence shows without question that the defendant's company knowingly breached its contract, concealing assets and manipulating terms to avoid accountability. The plaintiff has been wronged, and justice requires restitution." She turned to the jury, her gaze unwavering. "This is not only about contracts and numbers. It's about power and fairness. It's about whether truth can be buried under arrogance, or whether justice still has a place in this courtroom." A murmur spread through the gallery. The jurors leaned in, pens scratching, eyes following her every word. Callahan finally rose, his voice strained. "Objection. Counsel is appealing to emotion." Judge Whitman hesitated. He glanced at Maya, then at the jury. For once, his authority faltered. He cleared his throat. "Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Collins." The shift was seismic. The very judge who had questioned her right to stand there was now defending her right to speak. Maya continued, layering logic over evidence, precision over passion. Each point landed like a hammer, dismantling the defense's case piece by piece. Callahan tried to interject, but his objections fell limp, his confidence drained. When the jury foreperson finally rose hours later, the verdict came crisp and unequivocal. In favor of the plaintiff. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Maya exhaled slowly, her face calm but her eyes alive with quiet fire. Her client grasped her hand, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing us. For fighting for us." Across the aisle, Callahan stared at his notes, his career of arrogance crumbling in the silence of defeat. Judge Whitman adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and looked down at Maya. His words were stiff, reluctant, but undeniable. "Ms. Collins. Attorney Collins. The court recognizes your skillful presentation and your professionalism throughout these proceedings." It was not praise. It was an acknowledgement, dragged from the lips of a man who had been forced to see what he tried to ignore. Maya gathered her files slowly, deliberately, as if to show she was leaving nothing behind. She had won the case, yes. But more than that, she had won something larger, the undeniable truth that she belonged, and that their prejudice had no power over her competence. The courtroom, once filled with smirks and condescension, now watched her in silence. Not with pity, not with doubt, with respect. And for Maya Collins, that was only the beginning. The marble steps of the courthouse gleamed under the afternoon sun as attorney Maya Collins descended, her case files pressed neatly against her side. She had won, the verdict was hers, the client's justice secured. Yet as cameras began to gather, as murmurs swelled among law clerks and reporters, she understood, the real battle had only just begun. Inside courtroom 3B, she had dismantled a case. But beyond those walls lived a system that had dismissed her before she spoke a single word, that had measured her suit but not her mind, that had mocked her presence before acknowledging her power. And Maya Collins was not content with winning cases. She intended to change the rules of the courtroom itself. Days later, at a press conference hosted by the Bar Association of Georgia, Maya stood at the podium, her tailored navy suit catching the flash of cameras. A hush settled as she adjusted the microphone. "What happened in courtroom 3B was not unique," she began, her voice steady, deliberate. "It was visible. And that visibility is what forced accountability. But how many lawyers of color, how many women, how many voices have been silenced because their humiliation wasn't caught on record? Because no one listened." Gasps rippled among the attorneys and judges seated in the audience. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, others lowered their eyes, the weight of truth pressing into the room. Maya continued, her words layering logic and urgency. "We cannot wait for change to arrive by accident. We must create it. That is why I am proposing 3 immediate reforms that will protect the dignity of every practitioner who steps into these courtrooms." She raised a hand, counting them out, her voice resonant as though carried by generations behind her. First, mandatory anti-bias training for all judges, clerks, and attorneys, because education is the beginning of accountability. Second, anonymous reporting systems for discrimination in court, with real consequences for those found guilty of misconduct. And third, institutional audits conducted annually, ensuring that prejudice is not dismissed as anecdote, but tracked, measured, and eradicated. The hall erupted in murmurs, some defensive, others applauding. Maya waited, calm, her silence demanding their full attention. "I did not fight simply to win a verdict," she continued, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "I fought because the courtroom should never be a place where identity determines credibility. Justice cannot exist in a system that refuses to see those who uphold it." Her words reverberated far beyond the podium. Within weeks, her proposals were debated in state legislatures, adopted in pilot programs, and echoed by law schools across the country. Judges who once dismissed her now sat through training sessions she had spearheaded. Young attorneys of color whispered her name with pride, calling her victory a turning point. Months later, the Supreme Court of Georgia announced the Collins Initiative, a statewide reform package mandating diversity, accountability, and reporting protocols across all courts. And in quiet offices late at night, law students, Black, Latina, Asian, Indigenous, women, and men alike, studied case law with renewed conviction, knowing that their fight for space had a precedent. Not just in statutes, but in the story of a woman who refused to be invisible. The marble courthouse still loomed, unchanged in its architecture. But inside, the air had shifted. The echoes of condescension were being replaced by a new language: respect, reform, recognition. And at the heart of that transformation stood Maya Collins, once mistaken for a defendant, now remembered as the attorney who forced the law to confront its own blind spots. Her quiet strength had become an institution. Her victory had become a movement.